It's great to be here. I'm excited to be here. Number one, Oklahoma's always been in my mind as the home of Guthrie Scottish Rite. It's on my bucket list, something I plan to eventually get around to. And it's also the birthplace of the Native American Church, as I'm sure you all know. We'll get into that eventually. That's part of the talk. But we'll go ahead and jump right in. The sprig of acacia is an important symbol within Freemasonry. But as we're about to learn, unbeknownst even to the fraternity's own initiates, the acacia is rich in more than just symbolism. The theory to be here set forth is sure to be the most controversial that Masonry has seen espoused by one of her own acolytes since 1912, when Theodore Royce declared boldly that sexual magic is the key which opens up all Masonic and Hermetic secrets. And at first exposure, one might even suspect that mine is an equally outrageous proposal, because what I propose is just as, if not more taboo than the notion of sex magic. For what I propose is a hallucinogenic drug, namely DMT or dimethyltryptamine. So I ask you all to keep an open, if skeptical mind during this presentation. Now, in the earliest versions of the Master Mason degree, there is no mention made anywhere of a sprig of acacia. The references all are to a sprig of cassia, a different plant altogether having no real psychotropic value. Cassia is botanically labeled Cinnamonum cassia, is a cinnamon-like evergreen originating in southern China, whereas acacia, which can be either evergreen or deciduous, is a genus of nearly 1,000 species, with all but 10 or so of those having their origin in Australia. Sometime between the 1730s and 1745, a change was made across the board, and cassia would forever become acacia in Masonic ritual. Albert Mackey argued that the original inclusion of cassia in the Master Mason degree was an error that arose from the very common habit among illiterate people of syncing the sound of the letter A in the pronunciation of any word of which it constitutes the initial syllable. Acacia would therefore have become cassia. But I'm not so convinced. There's absolutely no evidence supporting the supposition that the switch from cassia to acacia was not a deliberate one. Now, while we do not know who was responsible for implementing the change, we may have discovered the reason why the switch was made. Our solution is at once alchemical and entheogenic. The principal goal of the alchemists was the production of something called the lapis philosophorum, or philosopher's stone, the stone of the wise. And this was created from the secret prima materia, or first matter, the primal matter. As the alchemical axiom states, the lapis is made not of stone, not of bone, and not of metal. That is to say, it comes not from the mineral kingdom and not from the animal kingdom, and must therefore be deduced that the stone is only to be found in the vegetable kingdom, namely within the acacia, which is Masonry's prima materia. Many present-day alchemists are content to produce stones from virtually any plant, mineral, animal, and they ascribing the value of those stones to their attributed planetary signatures. However, for a stone to meet the criteria of the true stone of the wise, planetary signatures will not suffice. It must first satisfy specific requirements, chief among those being the conferral upon its possessor of the gift of immortality. Now, let it be here said that the alchemical vocation is no vain search for physical immortality. Bodily longevity is not the variety of immortality here described. The famous mythologist Joseph Campbell explained rightly that the search for physical immortality proceeds from a misunderstanding of the traditional teaching. On the contrary, the basic problem is to enlargen the pupil of the eye so that the body, with its attendant personality, will no longer obstruct the view. Immortality is then experienced as a present fact. Indeed, the alchemists purport that the stone of the wise has the power to provide its possessor with the knowledge of his very immortal soul. Hence, it's also being called the stone of projection. For the soul of its possessor is the very thing that appears to be projected upon the stone's proper application. Liberated from its bodily frame, the stone-projected soul is free to roam the so-called astral plane, loose from the limitations of its corporal container, a concept that has come to be known as an outer-body experience or near-death experience. Conveniently, there exists a special class of magical plants that actually satisfies the above-listed criteria. We speak here of entheogens. As the word implies, entheogenic plants are those which generate an experience of one's divinity within. That is, entheogens have the potential to facilitate what appears to be the direct experience of one's immortal soul, of the continuity of consciousness independent of the mortal frame. And certain species of acacia, a symbol which Masonry tells us plainly is emblematical of our faith in the immortality of the soul, naturally constitutes a portion of these entheogens. As was explained, acacia is a genus of nearly 1,000 species of tree, some 100 of which are known to contain concentrated amounts of the powerful psychedelic compound DMT. DMT has been used in a ceremonial context among a number of indigenous groups, most notably the ayahuasca drinking tribes of the Amazonia and the yopo snuffing peoples of the Caribbean. Ayahuasca, also known as yahe, depending on the dialect, is a ceremonial beverage prepared by combining the DMT-containing plants Psychotria viridis, which are these leaves here, and the MAOI, which is a monoamine oxidase inhibitor, making this orally active, is this Banisteriopsis copy vine, which is the ayahuasca proper, which means soul, vine of souls, or vine of the dead, vine of spirits. So DMT is not normally active due to the presence of monoamine oxidase in the gut, but when combined with a monoamine oxidase inhibitor, or MAOI, it becomes so. The effects are profoundly psychedelic and last for up to 6 hours after drinking. Yopo, on the other hand, which is what you see here, is a snuff that's actually blown into the nose. Yopo is a ritualistic snuff that is prepared by combining the DMT-rich seeds of Anadenanthera colubrina or Anadenanthera peregrina, which are two species of acacia that exist in Brazil and South America, with calcium carbonate that has been created from calcinated shells of crustaceans, thereby rendering the snuff absorbable by the mucous membranes in the nasal cavity. The effect of yopo, on the other hand, lasts only a few minutes after each insufflation. Now, while neither ayahuasca nor yopo are prepared from a species of acacia proper, the latter has certainly been known to have been used in a multitude of entheogenic and inebriating contexts. In Mexico, for example, the roots of Acacia angustifolia are added to a beverage called pulque, prepared from the agave cactus. In West Africa, the leaves and bark of Acacia campylacantha are added to a brew called dolo, which is prepared from sorghum, penicetin, and honey. And it's the Africans believe it imparts strength and wisdom upon drinking. In Indonesia, India, and Malaysia can be found Acacia catechu, from which is concocted a substance that is used as an additive to betel quids, which is a kind of stimulant used by male societies, male secret societies in indigenous tribes, especially in Indonesia and India. And it's, let's see, in India also, two more species of acacia, Nilotica and Farnesiana, are used for as traditional aphrodisiacs and muscle relaxants. In South America, a brew called balche is prepared from the bark of Acacia cornigera, and in Australia, a wide variety of acacia leaves are burned as a medicinal smoke. And even here in America, the root bark of a species of acacia, albeit not a psychoactive one, is a key ingredient in some soft drinks, including Barq's root beer. Now, an important tree within the Hebrew tradition, the Ark of the Covenant is said to have been constructed with acacia wood. Acacia has even been proposed as the source of Moses' various visions in the volume of the Sacred Law. In his paper, Biblical Entheogens, a Speculative Hypothesis, Benny Shannon, who is the professor of psychology at Hebrew University in Israel, speculated that a local species of acacia-rich DMT, such as Acacia senegal, could have been combined with the native MAOI-containing Paganum harmala bush, known as Syrian rue, to produce a psychedelic brew chemically indistinguishable from ayahuasca. Now, in addition to the plant world, DMT is also endogenous, which means it's manufactured within and by the human body, as well as other living organisms, including rats and certain lizards. Although where in the body it's produced and under what circumstances still remains a medical mystery. No one really knows where, but in 2010 or 11, Cottonwood Research did discover DMT in the pineal glands of live rats. So the closest correlation we have to where it's produced in the human body is probably the pineal gland, which is then connected to the third eye, the Ajna chakra. Now, it's believed to be responsible for a number of spontaneous spiritual experiences, including mystical visions, outer body, and near-death experiences. This makes the compound quite different from the other class of hallucinogens, all of which are to be found only within the vegetable kingdom, not in humans. But while far, far more powerful, the effects of DMT are really very similar to those of mescaline, psilocybin, which comes from magic mushrooms, mescaline comes from peyote, and LSD. In the colorful words of the late psychedelic philosopher Terence McKenna, quote, "The experience that engulfs one's entire being as one slips beneath the surface of the DMT ecstasy feels like the penetration of a membrane. The mind and the self literally unfold before one's eyes. There is a sense that one is made new, yet unchanged, as if one were made of gold and had just been recast in the furnace of one's birth. Under the influence of DMT, the world becomes an Arabian labyrinth, a palace, a more than possible Martian jewel, vast with motifs that flood the gaping mind with complex and wordless awe. Color and the sense of a reality unlocking secret nearby pervade the experience. There's a sense of other times and of one's own infancy, and of wonder, wonder, and more wonder. Many diminutive beings are present there. One has the impression of entering into an ecology of souls that lies beyond the portals of what we naively call death. Here is a tremendum barely to be told, an epiphany beyond our wildest dreams. Here is the realm of that which is stranger than we can suppose. Here is the mystery, alive, unscathed, still as new for us as when our ancestors lived it 15,000 summers ago. The sense of emotional connection is terrifying and intense. The mysteries revealed are real, and if ever fully told, will leave no stone upon another in the small world we have gone so ill in." End quote. Truly, the DMT experience is the very stuff of religious ecstasy. It is no wonder then that certain alchemically inclined Freemasons who were privy to its psychedelic secret chose to interpret and employ the acacia in a similar light. The first author to our knowledge to offer an entheogenic solution for the problem of the acacia symbol in Freemasonry was Carl A.P. Ruck, a professor of classics at Boston University in Massachusetts, who wrote in his 2011 book, Mushrooms, Myth, and Mithras, The Drug Cult That Civilized Europe, quote, "The murdered body of Hiram Abiff, a master mason and master of works on Solomon's temple, was raised from his resting place beneath an acacia sprig, which marked the spot to those who would be sent by King Solomon to search. After the interred corpse of Hiram was found, Solomon himself went to the site to recover the body. Feeling beneath the ground at the side of the acacia, the king felt Hiram's hand. In the process of recovering his corpse, he first used the grip of the entered apprentice, then that of the fellow craft, but twice felt the skin slipping from Hiram's hand. Finally, Solomon used the grip of a master mason to raise the corpse. In the entheobotanical context, we feel that this myth is a description of a ritualized acacia harvest. We note that the subterranean root bark of acacia are known to contain high levels of dimethyltryptamine, an entheogen which is strongly psychoactive when extracted." End quote. Now, little did the professor know, there exist actual examples of acacia-produced DMT and its use in 18th century Masonic ritual. Now, this is where it gets a little, you just have to maintain an open mind. The earliest known Freemason to allude to the production of DMT from acacia was alchemist and general of the artillery of the Russian Empire, Pyotr Ivanovich Melosino, widely considered to be the greatest Russian artilleryman of the 18th century. In 1762, Melosino established a theurgic alchemico-Masonic rite which drew heavily upon mystic Christian themes. Now, I have to credit Arturo de Hoyos, the Grand Archivist and Grand Historian of the Southern Jurisdiction of the Scottish Rite, with the discovery of this quotation. Brother de Hoyos was gracious enough to contact me after making the translation for the Grand College of Rites and asked me to put it in my manuscript, and which I obviously did because I think he's right on point with believing it's pointing to DMT. Now, in the 7th degree of his rite, Melosino specifically refers to the acacia as the primal matter of the alchemists, from which is produced a stone, DMT salts, salt crystals, which is a veritable vegetable stone. The same being identified as the legendary stone of the philosophers. Melosino says that, and I quote, "The cubical stone is the alkaline universal salt. The master's degree speaks to us of the acacia, found upon Hiram's grave. This is the true primal matter from which the philosophers create their treasures. It is the true light of the world from which glorious Hiram shall rise again under the guise of the Redeemer. It is the burning coal of which Isaiah speaks in chapter 6, verses 6 through 7, and which must be prepared in accordance with the secret system of the wise men of old and the philosophers, i.e. the alchemists. One of our most mysterious materials is therefore the burning coal, which the Egyptian Kabbalah names clearly and without fuss." Now, what other than DMT could the treasures created from acacia have been? Of course, cubical stone is language which Melosino has obviously borrowed from Masonic ritual and refers to the perfect ashlar. But here he has clearly identified this ashlar with the salt that has been alchemically produced from the acacia. And indeed, DMT is just that, a salt. It's not a freebase, it's a salt. The scriptural allusion in the above excerpt refers to a biblical episode wherein a burning coal of an unspecified substance is placed upon Isaiah's lips by an angel, assumedly for him to inhale its fumes. That is, for him to smoke it. Smoking being one of the preferred modes by which DMT is normally consumed. "Lo," said the angel, "this burning coal hath touched thy lips, and thine iniquity is taken away, and thy sin is purged." That's key language. Note that acacia, or acacia, as Mackey related it, is suggestive of freedom from iniquity, or freedom from sin. Thine iniquity is taken away, and thy sin is purged indeed. One wonders how far back this tradition actually stretches. Now, nearly 2 decades after the establishment of Melosino's rite in Russia, Italy saw the appearance of another theurgic alchemico-Masonic rite, which also employed the acacia in an entheogenic context. Count Alessandro di Cagliostro's Egyptian Rite of Freemasonry. A close friend and colleague of Melosino, Cagliostro was an Italian alchemist, healer, and magician who died while unfairly imprisoned for the crime of heresy. The parallels between Cagliostro's use of the acacia and that of Melosino are readily apparent. In the apprentice and companion lectures of his Egyptian rite, the acacia is again referred to as being the primal matter in a very specific alchemical operation. When properly executed, this operation results in the production of a cubical ashlar. That is, the result is a purified, crystalline stone or salt that has been produced from acacia. This stone is then dissolved into a red liqueur, which is afterward imbibed by the candidate for initiation. Cagliostro's ritual states, and I quote, "The acacia is the primal matter, and when the rough ashlar or mercurial part has been purified, it becomes cubical. It is thus that you shall obtain the perfect projection. The candidate shall drink the red liqueur placed upon the master's altar, thereby raising his spirit in order to understand the speech which the worshipful master shall address to him at the same time. My child, you are receiving the primal matter. Learn that the great God created before man this primal matter, and that he then created man to possess it and to be immortal. Man abused it and lost it, but it still exists in the hands of the elect of God. And from a single grain of this precious matter becomes a projection into infinity. The acacia which has been given to you at the degree of master of ordinary masonry is nothing but that precious matter. And Hiram's assassination is the loss of the liquid which you have just received. End quote. Here, Cagliostro has identified the acacia with the tree of Eden, which Adam and Eve are said to have abused and subsequently lost after the fall. Again, as with Melissino's right, we see the treatment of DMT as both the perfect ashlar of masonry and the philosopher's stone of alchemy. Only in treating of Hiram Abiff as being consubstantial with the sprig of acacia, that they're both the same in the ritual, Cagliostro has carried this symbolism a step further. Now, our detractors have argued that Cagliostro's libation of acacia is purely symbolic. But why, we ask, would a purely symbolic act be described in the precise terms which one would expect had the same act been carried out literally? Cagliostro writes that his candidates for initiation shall drink a liquor prepared from acacia, the primal matter, thereby raising his spirit in order to understand. This is exactly the type of language which one would expect if Cagliostro was actually and not symbolically initiating his candidates with an entheogenic libation of acacia. The compound definitely satisfies the requirements of raising one's spirit and imparting a certain understanding that comes only from the type of inebriation induced by ingesting the drug. If not for its DMT content, we cannot conceive of any practical reason why the Count would have his acolytes literally drink an ayahuasca-like concoction of acacia. This was clearly no symbolic act. Granted, there is no mention made in Cagliostro's Egyptian rite of an MAOI-containing plant, the same of which would normally be necessitated in order to render DMT orally active, as in the case of ayahuasca. However, there are yet two other possibilities. The first is that if enough is consumed, the DMT may be able to overwhelm the monoamine oxidase within the gut, thereby making it orally active without the need of an MAOI. And the second possibility is currently being explored by a number of alchemists, but it's that the beta-carbolines present in certain species of acacia, such as Acacia confucia, has flavonoids present in them that act as beta-carbolines. So if the species was acacia, you wouldn't need an MAOI. As long as you took Acacia confucia, those flavonoids already act as beta-carbolines and thereby obliterate the need for an MAOI. So there's an alchemist named J. Eric Laporte. He runs out of Thailand. He has a retreat where he's actually using my research and giving people these DMT tinctures in Thailand in a legal context and having great success with it without the need of an MAOI. So, it's still being experimented with. But and he has a couple of books out, Cracking the Philosopher's Stone, Keys to the Kingdom of Alchemy, if y'all want to check those out. His name's J. Eric Laporte. Now, the final example of Masonic rite alluding to the production of DMT, which we'll here discuss, comes from the rituals of the Fratres Lucis, an alleged splinter group of the German alchemico-Masonic rite Der Ordens des Gold und Rosenkreuz. It should be noted that Cagliostro himself was believed by many to be a bona fide member of the Fratres Lucis, so much so that in writing his Royal Masonic Cyclopedia, Kenneth R.H. Mackenzie, along with F.G. Irwin and his son Herbert Irwin, resorted to nothing short of channeling Cagliostro in a crystal ball to ask him, how did the Fratres Lucis form? What are these guys? And the transmission they received stands to this day in the Royal Masonic Cyclopedia, if you want to look that up. But compare the following excerpt from the first degree of the Fratres Lucis from the Cagliostro's Egyptian rite. Quote, before receiving thee into the order, they took thee into a darkened room. This teaches thee that our matter is in a black state, our earth. We also took away all the metals thou hast upon thee. This shows that our matter is not found where metals grow. They tookest away thy clothing. It shows that our matter is stripped of the veil with which nature has clothed it. Thine eyes were blindfolded, which teaches that though our matter is luminous and in itself shining and clear, yet that it is only to be found in the darkest dwelling. A cable tow was round thy neck, by which the body was led. It teaches the drawing out of our matter. The point of a poniard was applied to thy breast to warn thee to beware of it. It should remind thee that no double-edged weapon need be used to slay our Hiram and produce his precious blood, which is shown afterwards by a feeble brother and his bloody handkerchief. And touching thee with the compasses, held over a plate with blood thereon. The plate held up signifies that we have another poniard beside the one that was shown to thee, and which we thrust into the bosom of our matter until it pours forth its blood. Hiram, which signifies our matter, has been killed by 3 workmen in order that they might procure the word. These traitors buried him and have already his caput mortuum, or dead head, alchemical term for reduced ashes. They make a hillock, and the dead head appears, as if the spirits excited it with rage. This is shown by the branch of the acacia. End quote. The Fratres Lucius lecture relates an alchemical application of Masonic ritual, which again clearly points to the production of DMT from acacia. Here, as in Cagliostro's ritual, Hiram is treated consubstantially with the acacia. In both, the DMT-rich solution, which is extracted from the acacia, our primal matter, prior to the solution's evaporation to a crystalline salt, is identified as Hiram's blood, called by Cagliostro the mercurial part, or liquid part. According to the lecture, the matter is to be found in the earth, that is, with the roots. As Ruck pointed out, the highest concentrations of DMT in the acacia are to be found within the root bark. The removal of the clothing or stripping of the veil with which nature has clothed it is therefore likely the stripping of the superfluous material, all but the DMT. The other poniard, which is thrust into the bosom of the matter until it pours forth blood, is perhaps an allusion to the alchemical solvent used to extract the compound. And the 3 workmen may very well allude to the three-step extraction process by which DMT is organically manufactured, etc., etc. Now, the idea that a psychedelic drug could have played a part in early Masonic ritual is often met by members of the fraternity with repugnance and disbelief. After all, we as free and accepted Masons are charged with the task of peacefully submitting to the laws of the land wherein we reside. And of course, outside of affiliation with the Santo Daime, the União do Vegetal, or the Native American Church, the only 3 organizations legally sanctioned to use DMT in our country, DMT production, possession, and consumption are completely illegal in the United States. One must keep in mind, however, that the time in question was the 18th century, when scientific investigation was still in its infancy, long before the war on drugs or the notion of psychedelics were even concepts. The detrimental effects of addiction were for the most part still to be seen, as were the hard drugs which are so plaguing society today, such as heroin, methamphetamine, and crack cocaine. Therefore, the stigma which so surrounds the use of essentially any drug in our day and age was completely foreign. Thus, the discovery of DMT and its magical effects would have been met with such novelty and excitement that it's no wonder that Masonic lectures were dedicated to its mysteries. Now, remarkably, DMT was largely unknown to the modern Western world up until the publication of an intriguing book titled DMT, the Spirit Molecule, a doctor's revolutionary research into the biology of near-death and mystical experiences, by one Dr. Rick Strassman. At the turn of the millennium, the book came out at the turn of the millennium, and between 1990 and 1995, Strassman administered some 400 doses of DMT to nearly 5 dozen human volunteers, and the book documents the project and the doctor's discoveries. Now, this is where it gets interesting, for me personally. The research which led to the publication of Strassman's book was funded by none other than the Scottish Rite Schizophrenia Research Foundation, a subsidiary of the Northern Masonic jurisdiction. As the story goes, LSD researcher Daniel Zander Friedman, who passed away in 1993, was a big supporter of Strassman's work and served on the scientific advisory panel of the Scottish Rite Schizophrenia Research Foundation. Friedman advised Strassman to apply for a grant from the foundation and assured him he would do all he could to get the DMT project funded. And for the contemplative Mason, I wholeheartedly recommend this book. It's a trip in itself. Now, in our estimation, it is beyond question that a number of Masonic rites allude to the production of DMT in their lectures from Acacia. What is questionable is how this curiosity of the craft came to be. Was the sprig of acacia added to Masonic ritual on account of its DMT content? Or did certain alchemically inclined Freemasons who were privy to the tree's entheogenic mysteries take it upon themselves to interpret and apply it in that manner? We may never know, just as we may never know who, if anyone, was responsible for the Cassia-Acacia switch in the first place. What we do know, however, is that DMT was not properly synthesized until the 1950s. The possibility that the compound was being extracted and employed by select Freemasons as early as the 18th century is therefore highly significant. Masons have repeatedly touted the order as a friend and protector of science, and perhaps for the first time, it's beginning to look as though the fraternity may have actually made a lasting contribution to the field. Now, we would like to close this study into the entheogenic potential of the acacia symbol in Masonry with a quote by H.L. Haywood, extracted from Volume 3 of Albert Mackey's Encyclopedia of Freemasonry and its Kindred Sciences, which quaintly confirms our current conclusion. Quote, "It is admitted that the texts and nomenclature of medieval materials on Hermetism were cryptic and queer, but for that there are several explanations for the need for secrecy, including the need to keep laymen from endangering themselves with drugs they could not understand. Surely DMT would fall into that category." Thank you. I'm open to any questions if anyone has any. Sample. Under your chair, in the envelope, under your chair.
Guinea pig volunteers.
Caleb. So, if we assume this is true, and I think you made a good case, how should we then interpret for us every second Wednesday what we're doing at Blue Lunch when we're initiating someone passing and raising?
I think the important message is the immortality of the soul. I don't think there's any need to use DMT in Lodge. I think we're at a point where people can grasp these concepts without tripping balls. But at the same time, there are those that some people call hard cases. You can meditate all you want, you can pray all you want, you can be a Kabbalist, all these things, but some people simply don't get results. And I don't care who you are, if you smoke DMT, you get that result.
The spirit molecule.
The spirit molecule. I don't know if you're familiar with Gurdjieff, G.I. Gurdjieff, a Russian mystic, but he talked about his system is called the fourth way. And he said, the fakir can spend an entire month in physical torture to produce a substance in his body that will give him a sense of enlightenment. Now, the monk could spend a week in emotional torture and produce the same substance in his body. A yogi could spend a day in mental torture and produce the same substance. But he said the fourth way practitioner, who he calls the sly man, knows how to find these substances outside of himself, and he puts them in a pill and takes them, and then he loses no time in the process. So and this was in 1950.
Logic and reason.
Yeah, but it's nothing new. It's really nothing new. And like I said, he was Russian, so P.D. Uspensky, who really presented a lot of Gurdjieff's ideas, he admitted that Gurdjieff got some of his ideas from Russian Freemasonry. I'm not convinced it wasn't from Melusina, from some of his crew that he initiated. But like I said, for people who know, if you know that the acacia contains DMT and what the DMT experience entails, then the minute acacia is referenced in Freemasonry, there's no way to not make those connections for yourself if you've experienced it. Now, I don't know if any of you experienced psilocybin mushrooms, magic mushrooms, but the active compound is the chemical makeup of it 4-phosphoryloxy DMT. So even if you're familiar with mushrooms, you're pretty close to being familiar with DMT. But the DMT experience, I would say, is multiplied.
So do you distinguish between the spiritual side versus the Masonic influences of, either psilocybin mushrooms or
What do you
DMT?
say? Let's rephrase
Well,
that.
it seems to me like a lot of influence or thought process coming from the spirit molecule, so to speak. You're connecting with your spiritual side of things. Does it separate with, say, Native American? I've got friends that come down to that are Native Americans, and they do ayahuasca
Yeah.
journeys or whatnot.
Anybody who's affiliated with the Native American Church.
But I'm just
can
trying to
legally
distinguish
use it.
differences between like some of their practices and beliefs versus like how the Freemasons may see and interpret the connection there as far as.
I think it's gonna be unique to the Freemason question, number one, and number two. Anybody that was a member of the Native American Church could be a Freemason. So I don't think they're mutually exclusive. I think they could dovetail very easily. The peyote experience is very similar to the DMT experiences. All these things, the things I call classic hallucinogens, DMT, LSD, psilocybin mushrooms. There are other hallucinogens that aren't classic hallucinogens that don't induce these kinds of spiritual entheogenic experiences where you come out feeling like for the first time you've experienced nature and yourself.
Do you feel like there's a unique experience to the Freemasons due to this? Potentially in your theory,
That wouldn't be present.
partaking and that wouldn't be in other spiritual.
I think the real benefit, what Freemasonry has that other things don't have, is the acceptance of people from other paths. And I think that far outweighs any application of DMT. This stuff's trivial. I'm not up here saying anybody should ever use this stuff.
Look for
It's just, I really feel like this case needs to be made because we don't have an answer for why Cassia became a Cassia. We don't really know what, if not this, what were Melisino and Cagliostro doing? I just can't figure it out. It was either a bunch of lip service and symbols, or they're really dealing with something that required this language. And I don't think Masonry has anything that any other, I don't want to say psychedelic religion, but religions that retain a psychedelic sacrament. I don't think it has anything to offer that they don't. And I'm not trying to detract from Masonry, but I think I'm more speaking of the universalism than to the elitism of it, I guess. Anything else?
I think we
If we would have experimented with this in the 1960s, we may have a real resurgence of Freemasonry. Hallucinatory drugs at that time.
Right.
But I'm wondering if it's not entirely symbolic. What's the difference between experiencing something you've never experienced because you've used an hallucinatory drug, or having an insightful experience, or having
I don't think there's any difference.
I don't think there's any difference. It's just,
Like I said, it's for the hard cases.
Yeah.
The people who don't get those revelations.
So I'm wondering if it's not a symbolic idea more than a literal.
But if it's symbolic, do you think it's playing on the knowledge that DMT was present in the plant?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's just as a powerful message because it expresses a knowledge of something that science had no concept of until the 50s. Yeah. Yeah, good point.
We run into the question of authenticity whenever we are talking about hallucinogens, in that there's always the question of if it is a more authentic experience if it comes naturally through discipline versus a drug
That's a good point.
that would shortcut it. And it's the same obstacle we reach when we look at the authenticity of religion based on its age. Most people get a little bit twitchy when we talk about Mormonism, for instance, because it's too close. We've got a history there. We've got something that's, we can pick dates.
Right.
And talk about it. So it makes some people
It removes the
uncomfortable to-
mystery.
Yes, but if it gets back far enough, suddenly it builds in its authenticity, and there's some kind of credulence that comes about because of that. And I think it's that same question that comes up in our mind if it's a chemical, whether it's natural or
Well, like we said, DMT is endogenous. It's
Yes.
produced in your body. So it might be responsible for some of those experiences that take a month, a week, or a day of tortures, of practices.
yes.
But my other answer to that would be, Johns Hopkins University, we're trying to determine whether or not a spiritual experience could be induced with magic mushrooms. And what they determined was, yes, it can, number one. And number two, they could not distinguish, they had could not develop a criteria to distinguish between psilocybin-induced spiritual experiences and spontaneously occurring spiritual experiences. The content is identical. Well, I mean, I don't mean two people have the same experience, of course, but the level of, I don't even know what you want to call it. These doctors
Awareness.
studying this could not tell the difference between a psilocybin trip and a vision someone had through praying or meditation. So that alone is pretty significant.
That's more of awareness, though, isn't it?
Brother Newman, I'll go ahead.
Awareness of the distinction. I mean.
Well, I've had
between
results.
drugs
I've
like
had
in
results.
meditation, you can take yourself.
You can, but that's
take
what-
yourself into some pretty deep
You can,
places.
you can, but is
And
it a
it not being
DMT trip?
drug induced.
Is it
I mean,
still a DMT trip? Because
No.
we produce
not
it
what
from
I'm
our
suggesting,
brains.
but the awareness of the differences and where your body and your mind is actually taking you at times. It seems like.
Sure, I'm with you.
I don't remember who it was, but someone suggested that, actually it might be on the Spiritual Molecule movie, not the book.
Mhm.
But I haven't read the book. That maybe the reason that this distinction exists is because endogenously DMT, if it is produced in the pineal gland, which it is used to sort of, this is the language they use, to sort of slingshot the soul out of the body, right? So that it's not something you can just sort of, at least not for a novice.
I've never gotten it. I've been doing yoga for 15 years. I've been practicing Kabbalah for a number of years. I've dabbled and had my hand in every esoteric cookie jar. And I have never gotten anywhere close to the results I've gotten after smoking DMT. It's just never happened.
I'll go out there and admit that I'm one of the guys that's done some psilocybin a few times myself. After growing spiritual and with the intent of having a journey to the point of fasting before and making a trip to a spiritual place and just preparation, and I've done a lot of ritual through a lot of different, and nothing ever came close.
Right. That's
Nothing
awesome.
ever cracked that door open like it did. And I may be the hard case. Don't get me wrong.
And that's
But I
language
am
they
the hard
use.
case.
There are hard cases that
And
they
I
can't
may-
ever get anywhere with these natural practices.
But that
There's
door
nothing wrong
opened.
with that.
Alex Gray's art, for example, one of my favorite artists. I actually can see how he draws it.
Right.
From one
He tells
experience.
you how.
Yes,
He says he
and
smokes DMT.
exactly. Well, but I didn't know that at the time,
Yeah.
but I did after the experience. And some people may need that. So I guess my point may be that our tolerance level of as humans, of the way that we need to contact spiritual places in ourselves to elevate us to the next level, or to a level that we need to be, is going to be different.
Yeah.
Maybe if you have shells that you've placed upon yourself, or your experiences in life may have hardened places that you need soft before you can break through to that. And so that lack of judgment, I have Native American brothers that have explained to me that their viewpoint on humanity changed because of peyote trips that they've gone through, and now that they can truly love one another and love a white man, even though their grandparents told them not to, because the spirits told them that that's
the
bullshit.
magic of the transcendent.
It is, and I can personally vouch for that, through psilocybin, DMT, and several other things. But I Anyway,
Cinnamon.
hard case over here. Mine needed it.
Well, and before I became a Mason, I'll tell you, I was involved in what they call the Gnostic Sophian tradition through this guy named Dal Malachi. But when I first met him, I said, before I get a foot off in any of this muck you're trying to send me into, answer me one question. Do you allow that psychedelics are a valid path to spiritual experience? Because every experience I've had seems to have came from a psychedelic experience. I've never been able to do it otherwise. And what he said was, number one, we call this the Eucharist of Sophia. I don't know where he got that. But he said we only use this for hard cases, people who can't break through prayer and meditation. He said we take them to the Native American church.
Well, I happen to be a guy that was 6 years old in the church every Wednesday and 2 times Sunday, and went home to the indoctrination of something I didn't really understand or believe because I was a kid trying to figure out the world.
Right.
So later, when it came time for me to actually touch spirituality, it was a lot harder to do because, just words and echoes and things that I was supposed to do just didn't make sense. So I remember the first time I went on a journey specifically to try to find that spirituality was real and that God wasn't just an illusion or a description. It was a part of me, part of my spirit. And I remember, vividly to this day, that first door opening. And I can't explain to you what it looked like, and I would probably be thrown into a mental institution if I was to try to write it down and say, but truly for me though, I can see why it would be necessary for certain people to have that to crack the door to spirituality.
Right. I think part of the necessity of it is our current Western mind frame. I don't feel like capitalism is conducive to these states of, and I'm not railing on capitalism. I mean, there's only so many ways to exist in this world. But I don't know. I just know I've never had much results from, and that doesn't mean I don't stop practicing. I still try. I still do my practices every day. And, but yeah, the main the only results worth mentioning to you came from DMT, psilocybin, things like that, natural compounds.
I hadn't thought about this until just now. The lyrics from Sturgill Simpson, I don't know if you listen to him. But,
Yeah.
Him talking about you mess with the devil, sometimes you're going to get the horns. Is from that perspective, then, is the third degree in part the dark side, looking into the shadow, experiencing the negative parts within oneself? I mean, do you feel like perhaps that might have developed out of a darker experience?
It could be, yeah. I mean, one question that a group of Masons that is involved in men's work with me was proposed is, do we do shadow work? Does Masonry ever approach work on the shadow? And the only time that I can really think it does is when you get to play the part of a ruffian. But it does deal with that kind of stuff, and that's where it occurs in the third degree. I mean, granted,
that resonates with me. Really big time. Learning that number 3, being the guy that kills the guy, doing that part is very.
Yeah, if you can become it and really just let yourself explore that, kill truth, that we all have that in us to hush down truth and try and make our ego be the one that's right in the face of everyone else. I think that's a real opportunity playing a ruffian provides.
And in fact, every degree of the laws of perfection, from the 4th to the 10th, deals with the shadow side of our side.
Yeah, that's true. There is a lot of conflict that shows up in those degrees. That's a good point. There's definitely more in the Scottish Rite dealing with the shadow. Yeah.
Truthfully, in my experience is you do see, you deal with the dark part of yourself no matter what, and pretty much every experience I've ever had like that at some point, generally at the beginning, and then you somehow make it through to light.
And we all deal with the dark side of ourselves every day, but for those of you who have never experienced a psychedelic, you're forced to deal with it.
Sure.
You
It's
know,
immediately
there's
in
no
your
way
face.
out of it. You are put face to face with every positive thing, every negative thing, all of your potential, all of your wasted potential. Your whole life is given to you in a spinning gray minute. And
I won't divulge any names because, but a buddy of mine, we were in Medicine Park. I'm just kidding. It's not here. We went and did this several years ago, and he disappeared into his tent and wrestled in his mind with an angel for hours. And I mean, you can see the shadow of the light lantern on the tent. He was just rolling around in there.
Yeah.
And when he was done with this night, it was probably an hour in there, but he felt like it was all night, 2 days. He was like, "What day is it?"
you understand what Blake meant when he
Yes.
said the whole eternity.
It was totally, and this
All
was
in
an
your hand.
unexperienced fellow that he was probably one of the guys that introduced me to some of that. And it was, he knew that, and he hadn't gone down that path in years. And he said, "Man, it's going to be hard on me, but I know I need to struggle with this."
Yeah.
And it was a turning point in his life again. You know, he needed another one, and it was that a veil was opened up, and unbelievable success just after that. You know, he was able to shred some subconscious things that had been holding him back, and very successful fellow. And you wouldn't believe it if you knew who he was, but I would tell you. Just wanted to say
It sounds pretty fantastic.
Well, at first, you're faced with obstacles that you cannot fully overcome. You're faced with death. Then you're faced with ignorance. And it's only at last that you are faced with the own dark side of your own choosing. Your choices that cause you to be a force for darkness. Right. Where the first two are more passive. Which is, not to go off on too much of a tangent, but I've always been struck by the passivity of the third, in that you're not the one making the decisions, they're made for you and you're just experiencing them. But it seems as though what you're talking about is a reflection of oneself. You're forced to look within yourself and see those dark aspects
That's absolutely right.
that are, you can no longer claim to be a passive reaction to the events of the world within around you. These are the dark parts of your own soul that spring out and cause you to act out of your own darkness, out of your own brokenness.
Right. Yeah, that's pretty profound.
Native American sweat lodges are pretty good at facilitating the
Yeah.
same kind of.
Yeah, you can get the same results from a sweat, and that's part of what I was talking about with these tortures. You know, that's one of the tortures that I wholeheartedly. I've had results in sweat lodges.
I have a friend of mine that tells me that sweat lodges, to him, what he would see is everything earthy. I mean, he would just see animals and find himself buried in the ground with animals and stuff, and could feel them and see, and it was just always that experience of nature, a connection, something revealed to him about himself, but then the acceptance that that's okay.
Yeah, you
That's
go
just a
you
part
go
of
through a
life.
sweat and you come out into the pipe circle, and it's like night and day. I mean, sweating is torture. But when you come out, you enter the circle, and they smoke a kinnikinnick, is what they call it. It's 5 different plants. But I'm sure. Have you smoked the kinnikinnick? When you come out and smoke it, it's almost like it's like an air conditioner on you. I know you've just been sweating, so it's hot, but something about smoking that mixture after sweating causes a real kind of breaking of the tension. For me, always leads to the real
Well, I
catharsis
assume-
I'm looking
I
for.
assume almost anybody that experiences a Native American sweat lodge becomes acquainted with the totems. You know, whatever the totem is, it's going to visit you during that process.
Right.
And, so that's kind of a release of all that, I think,
Yeah.
that when you come out in that circle.
Yeah, tension and release. That's exactly right.
A little shift here, but perhaps.
Sure.
You mentioned under the quote, referencing under the cubicle stone.
Mhm.
It stated that Hiram shall rise again under the guise
Of the Redeemer.
of the Redeemer.
Right.
Tell us more.
Well, I really don't know what Melissino was hinting at there, aside from the fact that he might have drawn some parallels between Hiram and Christ, which Albert Pike did, which I think is pertinent when you consider them both as perfect symbols of truth. But as far as
And if he was under the guise of the Redeemer, however, then who is he?
yeah, I don't know. I wish Melisino was here for us to ask him. Yeah, I really don't know what he's hinting at. It's the only time he refers to it in the whole ritual. And there's some 10 degrees, 7 or 10 degrees. And in the whole ritual, that's the only place where he says under the guise of the Redeemer. But I assume what he's getting at is it's the point when we're all called to task, like what we've been talking about. When you use these substances, you're face to face with the negative, the positive. It's the moment. It's the deciding moment. You know, that could be what he's hinting at. You know, but I really don't know. I can't see that in being here. It would all be me speculating, as well as you. What do you suspect?
Respect.
That's why I ask you. You're the expert.
I'm not an expert on this.
Your opinion's more
Really
important
curious.
than
Yeah. Really curious. But I really don't know. That's a great question, and if I get an answer, I'll get it back to you. It's something I'm interested in too. I would love to know what he meant by
That just really
under the
struck
guise
me
of
when I
the
saw
Redeemer.
that, and
Yeah.
to think more deeply about who indeed was Hiram.
Yeah.
Or that raises that question, at
Right,
least in my
right.
own mind.
That's a good
How
question.
hard was it to discover this kind of science? What kind of knowledge came down from?
I'll be completely honest with you, man. I've been experimenting with psychedelics. My great-great-grandfather was the first white man who was trained as a medicine man for, it's either the Chickasaw or Choctaw. I'm not sure which. But I was caught picking mushrooms in Mississippi, in this field behind my grandmother's house. And I looked out, and there's my uncle standing there, and I panicked and threw him down. Walked back to him, thinking I'm about to get in trouble, and he started chiding me. He said, "You're just like your great-great-granddaddy Doherty." And I said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "He used to walk these cow fields at the crack of dawn, picking mushrooms for healing." He said, "He was a healer, you know." And I said, "No, I didn't know. Who is this Doherty, you know?" And he says, "Yeah, he used to pick mushrooms to heal." He said, "I don't know what he did with them." And I was thinking, I know what I do with them. The mushrooms I walk cow fields for at the crack of dawn, you know. And so I had been experimenting with all these things since about age 11. I mean, they grow naturally in Mississippi and Tennessee, so I mean, that's what kids do. That's what I was doing. And after a particularly profound experience, I decided to set aside psychedelics and pursue initiation among traditional means. And that's when I started exploring Rosicrucian and eventually came to Freemasonry. I really did not ever consider using psychedelics again, or even that was a chapter that was behind me. But when I became a Mason in the 3rd degree, I was struck by the mention of acacia and the reference to the immortality of the soul. So I wrote this speculative paper, just called The Sprig of Acacia, about how, well, isn't it convenient that DMT gives you an experience of the immortality of your soul by giving you a projection of consciousness outside of your body, while the acacia shows up in Masonic ritual and they say it's an emblem of our faith in the immortality of the soul. So I just said, this is convenient, how fun, you know. And it wasn't until Bob Cooper and Pip Fawkes wrote their Cagliostro book, and I bought the book and was reading it and got to the lecture portion, and he started talking about drinking acacia, and I couldn't believe it. I mean, why would you be drinking acacia if not for the reason I was drinking acacia, you know? So everybody thought I was crazy, of course, but the only person who didn't was Arturo de Hoyos. He said, "I think you're on to something. Keep it up. This is really important." So I kept it up, and he sent me the Melisino bit, and I found the Fractus Lucis bit, and I really feel like they're all pointing to the same thing. And, you know, and it wasn't until just recently that it dawned on me that the Cassia-Acacia switch might have had a reason behind it. It might not have just been as simple didn't know how to pronounce a word, which seems silly to me, because even Preston put Cassia. If William Preston, if he put Cassia, who we consider to be the ultimate source for our rituals as we know them now, it just makes me wonder,
I just have one other question.
Sure.
You were introduced as a Rosicrucian, and indeed mentioned that you are in the program. What strain?
SRCF.
Okay.
Yeah,
And why?
Why?
Yeah.
I wanted to be a Rosicrucian before I became a Mason, and whenever I found SRICF, I found out there was a college in Mississippi and contacted the chief adept, and I said, hey, I want to be a Rosicrucian. He said, oh, what lodge do you belong to? And I hung up the phone real quick because I didn't belong to a lodge. So I went and petitioned for the 3 degrees, and it was the staircase lecture when I realized I had maybe bitten off more than I could chew with masonry. And by the Master Mason degree, it had my full attention. And I finally went through York and ran into the guy that I had called, and he said, didn't you call me? And I said, yeah, and he handed me an invitation. So it was really nice. It worked out great. But I never intended to be a Mason. I wanted to be a Rosicrucian. And when I became a Mason, I realized there was plenty there to keep me busy. I still love SRCF. I adore my college and go avidly. But yeah, Masonry has my full attention.
And you cannot be an Archbishop of Rosicrucian honor unless you're a Mason.
That's right. That's right.
And you can be another sex.
Amorc or FRA, there's a ton.
Do you happen to know if Bob Davis knew about the DMT trials and hid it from everybody in this jurisdiction?
I'll send you some private emails.
He's retired.
Jason, this is off the
I'm not accountable for anything that I tried in the Masons.
As long as you don't want to be
I wasn't a Mason until 69.
There you go. You got to stress that. 67, can't speak to that.
Falls under communicate to receive by as such. So.
That's on the downhill.
Brother Newman, I'd just like to present you a certificate of recognition. It says, be it known by all men and Masons throughout the world that on the 16th day of September, 1616, Lodge Veritas 56 of Lawfully Constituted Lodge of the Grand Lodge of Oklahoma, each free and accepted Masons hereby recognize and commends Brother P.D. Newman for the countless hours he has dedicated to promoting the pursuit of Masonic life, as well as for being the guest speaker at Lodge Veritas Fall 2016 Festival. I want to thank you so much for your speech, and I hope that you've got time to visit with us one more on the patio afterwards. So, thank you very much, sir. Thank you.